The first brush of dawn found Amari Davis perched on the low retaining wall behind the City Museum, her sketchbook splayed open on her lap like a sacred text. In the dim light, she traced the curves of the building's blank concrete wall, imagining how her mural would wrap its surface in color and story. She saw a soaring phoenix whose feathers unraveled into scenes of community gardens tended by elders, children dancing to drum beats under porch lights, and elders' hands sifting through faded family albums. Each image would link into the next, a living tapestry of Black life, too vibrant to be confined by sterile exhibition halls. She had spent weeks gathering every ounce of courage and every scrap of artistic confidence she possessed. Portfolios from gallery shows, letters of praise from art professors, photos of her community workshops where neighbors learned to paint their own histories onto reclaimed wood panels. She tucked a page of testimonials into her bag. Amari gave voice to our grandmother's wisdom, one read. Her work made me proud to be seen, said another. With each step toward the museum's service entrance, her heartbeat quickened, but she reminded herself that she was not begging for permission. She was offering the city a gift. Inside the cavernous loading bay, the air smelled faintly of varnish and dust. Crates lined the walls, each stamped with a sponsor's name. She laid out her sketches on a long metal table, the pale underglow of fluorescent bulbs washing her drawings in cool light. As she spoke of color palettes rich as harvest sunsets and patterns bold as gospel harmonies, her words felt alive, echoing off bare walls. But when the exhibition's coordinator examined her samples, murmuring about the museum's aesthetic and avoiding thematic overload, his praise felt hollow. He admitted with uncomfortable candor that they were seeking art that blends in, not art that proclaimed identity. His last phrase, a little too black for our brand, landed inside her chest like a heavy stone. Amari gathered her work with slow resolve. Behind her, the museum's silent galleries stretched on, empty expanses where her phoenix would have burst into flame. She slipped out through the same loading bay door, her sketchbook pressed to her heart, already plotting a new kind of exhibition, one unbound by permission, one that would rise across blank walls like a demand for recognition. And as the first golden rays of sunrise spilled over the wall she could see from the alley, she dared to believe that this act of reclaiming space would be the city's boldest masterpiece yet. That night, after the curator's dismissal echoed in her mind, Amari slipped into her studio just long enough to gather supplies. A stack of plywood panels scavenged from a neighborhood demolition site, buckets of exterior paint in vivid hues, brushes of every size, and rolling stencils spelling out her rallying phrase. At 2 in the morning, she drove her aging hatchback to the alley behind the museum, the only witnesses the scuttling rats and the distant hum of traffic. She sat up under the weak glow of a single street lamp, unrolled her full-scale sketches against the concrete wall, and began transferring faint outlines in chalk. As her brush touched the plywood, thick strokes of burnt sienna and cobalt blue came alive, forming the phoenix's wings. She worked methodically, panel by panel, layering scenes, an elderly woman planting okra beneath a summer sun, a group of schoolchildren skipping rope to a drummer's beat, a pair of siblings dancing in front of a brownstone porch, their laughter frozen in paint. Each image bled into the next, the edges of panels interlocking like puzzle pieces, until the plywood mosaic covered nearly 20 feet of wall. By dawn's first light, she leaned back to admire her makeshift masterpiece, a vibrant string of memories that cascaded over the alley's concrete expanse. Then, one by one, she unlocked metal clasps on the panels and slid them into place, securing each with steel brackets drilled into the wall's mortar. A final sweep of deep gold across the phoenix's eye caught the rising sun, igniting the mural in a blaze of color that seemed to breathe. When passersby later discovered the exhibit, early joggers, night shift workers on their way home, they paused in wonder. Black professionals heading to morning meetings debated whether the museum would order its removal. A street artist photographed the phoenix's fiery eye and posted it online with the caption, "They said this didn't belong, but look what belongs here." By mid-morning, the concrete alley was alive with whispers. Who did this? It's beautiful. I've never felt so seen. Across town, museum staff arrived to find their blank wall transformed overnight. Security cameras recorded Amari's silent labor, and the director, summoned by a flurry of phone calls, stood in stunned silence before the mural. The crate-stamped sponsor labels in the loading bay suddenly felt hollow against the vivid stories now unfurled on their exterior. In that moment, Amari's Guerrilla exhibit had not only forced the museum to confront its own biases, but had irrevocably altered the city's landscape, proving that, when art is born of truth, no curator can keep it confined indoors. By midday, the mural had become the alleyways impresario, drawing astonished crowds far larger than any indoor gallery opening. Office workers peered from their windows, students detoured from classes, and delivery drivers parked their vans to snap photos. Social media accounts tagged Alley Art Takeover buzzed with images of the phoenix wings unfurling across the concrete, and a local influencer live-streamed interviews with passersby, marveling at the kaleidoscope of black life rendered in paint. Inside the museum, the exhibition's coordinator scrolled through the flood of social posts, each more insistent than the last. When's the removal? No, leave it up forever. If this isn't museum-worthy, nothing is. The director's phone lit up with texts from board members demanding action, and from city council members threatening inquiries into the museum's public art responsibilities. Galleries fell silent as curators shared the alley images on their screens, whispers of "too late" and "this is powerful" passing between them in hushed tones. As afternoon light shifted, a small delegation of museum staff ventured out to the alley. They hovered at the edge of the crowd, clipboard-wielding curators debating whether to condemn the unsanctioned work or to embrace its impact. A junior curator, emboldened by the public's reaction, stepped forward and asked a young onlooker, "Do you think the museum should remove this?" The student's answer was immediate. "Remove? The museum should install more of this." A ripple of agreement rose behind her. That evening, the museum's communications team drafted an urgent press release, an apology mixed with praise, alongside a tentative promise to commission a diversity-focused mural series. But the public's appetite had grown insatiable. Within hours, letters from neighborhood councils and art foundations poured in, offering grants to support a broader public art program. Local businesses proposed partnerships to light the mural at night and to host community painting days. By the next morning, the museum's leadership found themselves at a crossroads: to erase a work that had captured the city's heart, or to harness its momentum into a genuine commitment to diverse art. And as the sun rose on the Phoenix mural, its wings stretching toward a new dawn, the decision became impossible to deny. Amari Davis's Guerrilla exhibit had seized the public's imagination and forced the institution to expand its walls as boldly as her colors had already expanded theirs. Museum trustees filed into the glass-walled conference room above the alley, each carrying a tablet displaying the overnight coverage of Amari's mural. Light from the alley's floodlit wings spilled through the windows, painting gold streaks across the polished table where donors, curators, and the director took their seats. The chair cleared her throat and summoned the assistant to project images of the mural onto the wall behind her. Close-ups of the painted grandmother's hands, of children dancing in front porch swings, of the phoenix's eye gleaming in molten ochre. At first, the conversation circled around liability and precedent, uncommissioned art, potential vandalism, security concerns. One trustee warned that endorsing Guerrilla installations could open a floodgate of unsanctioned work across the city, while another fretted over the strain on exhibition budgets. But as testimonials from neighborhood leaders and art patrons poured in via live chat, voices urging celebration, not erasure, the room began to shift. A major donor present to discuss the annual gala tapped his stylus against the tablet and said, "I'll triple my pledge if we commit to a new public art endowment modeled on this mural." The director stood, voice low but urgent. "This isn't simply about art, it's about relevance. We stand at a moment when our walls speak only to a fraction of this city's stories. Amari's piece has ignited an appetite for public engagement that we cannot temper with excuses or footnotes." He laid out a proposal. The museum would fund a series of murals by local Black, Indigenous, and other underrepresented artists to be installed on its exterior, and would create a rotating outdoor gallery curated by community members. Gallery staff would partner with the Parks Department to install signage explaining each work's cultural context, and the museum would allocate 5% of its annual acquisitions budget specifically for living artists of color. A hush fell as the trustees digested the sweeping plan. Then, one by one, hands raised in support. The chair tapped the gavel softly and announced that the proposal was approved unanimously. Within minutes, emails flew to grant writers, curators, and community liaisons, charging them with launching the Stories on Stone initiative by the following quarter. That evening, as Amari walked past the alley, she saw museum staff measuring the wall's remaining blank panels, scaffolding being delivered, and the director himself chatting with her about themes for the next commission. The air thrummed with possibility, and with the echo of every suppressed story now poised to erupt across the museum's facade. In that charged twilight, Amari understood that her clandestine brushstrokes had done more than decorate a wall. They had transformed an institution, ensuring that every mural born of lived experience would find its rightful place in the city's collective memory. Amari arrived at the museum loading dock one crisp morning to find a fleet of scaffolding trucks idling under the alley's floodlights. In her arms, she carried a stack of thick proposal binders, each brimming with designs from fellow artists of color who had answered the Stories on Stone call. As she stepped around the original Phoenix mural, museum staff greeted her with bright smiles and spread a long table for her to unpack. Within hours, community members began to trickle in. Neighborhood elders clutching printed sketches of ancestral figures, local students bearing digital portfolios of street art stencils, and assistants from nearby galleries helping to organize submissions by theme: heritage, social justice, and future dreams. Amari presided over the first Stories on Stone selection workshop, guiding participants through each artist's vision and encouraging them to speak about what their neighborhoods needed to see reflected in public art. The energy crackled as the former loading bay pulsed with conversation, chalk dust swirling underfoot, paper prototypes fluttering like flags of possibility. By midday, the museum's newly formed Community Curatorial Council, an equal partnership of museum staff, neighborhood representatives, and local arts advocates, had shortlisted 5 proposals. Among them were a vibrant montage of jazz musicians in midriff by a veteran muralist, an abstract series representing the migration of diasporic communities, rendered in metallic paints, and a poignant portrait cycle of unsung civic leaders, each face framed in hand-carved limestone panels. Each proposal was debated with respect and rigor, community members offering personal stories of how each image resonated with their own experiences of belonging. That evening, as the sun dipped past the rooftops, Amari stood on a raised platform to announce the chosen artists. A hush fell over the crowd as she read the names one by one, voices cheering and cameras clicking at every announcement. The first commission piece, she explained, would flank the Phoenix mural with a 7-panel homage to elder activists who had built community gardens in forgotten lots. Other panels would follow across the museum's exterior, creating a narrative arc of struggle and hope from one end of the building to the other. Over the next weeks, Amari worked side by side with the lead muralist in the alley, measuring, mapping, and mixing pigments until every hue matched the designer's intent. On weekends, she led walking tours for museum members and school groups, explaining each new work's symbolism and the community process that had brought it to life. Passersby lingered longer now, reading placards that detailed the artist's statements, and nodding in recognition as they saw their own stories reflected in living color. Even the museum's security guards began greeting her by name, offering coffee as they watched each panel rise. When the final brushstroke was laid on the last panel, a swirling depiction of future youth inspired by the Phoenix's rebirth, Amari stepped back, her heart full. The once blank alley had blossomed into an outdoor gallery where every brick bore witness to voices long ignored. Museum visitors now entered through that back entrance as eagerly as through the front doors, drawn by the promise that art here was woven by and for the entire community. In that moment, Amari knew that her guerrilla act of defiance had grown into a living, breathing testament. When institutions open their walls and ears, every story can find its place in the light. As autumn's golden light bathed the alley, a festive energy permeated the air. Amari arrived early to oversee the final preparations for the inaugural Stories on Stone unveiling ceremony. String lights were draped overhead and rows of folding chairs lined the newly painted panels. A long table held programs and refreshments supplied by local businesses, the bakery's sweet potato donuts, the coffee shop's spiced lattes. Each vendor a collaborator in the museum's outreach effort. Community members filed in, school children clutching sketchbooks, elders leaning on canes but craning their necks to see the full stretch of the mural cycle, and neighborhood activists wearing buttons that read, "Our stories, our stones." Museum trustees and donors took seats in the front row, some shyly flipping through event brochures that explained the significance of each piece. Amari stood off to the side, her pulse quick with anticipation as she watched the gathering crowd unify in buzzed conversation about the art they had made possible. When the museum's director stepped to the podium, his usual formal tone was warmed by genuine enthusiasm. He spoke of the risks the institution had taken and the profound rewards of embracing community-driven art. Then he introduced each artist, inviting them to share a few words about their panels. The veteran muralist described how painting jazz legends had reawakened patrons' memories of weekend concerts. The abstract painter spoke of diasporic echoes traced across the city skyline. The sculptor of limestone portraits explained how carving each elder's visage had felt like breathing life back into local history. Their voices carried across the alleyway, punctuated by smiles, tears, and nods of recognition. When it was Amari's turn, she stepped forward in a simple black jumpsuit and thanked the museum, the artists, and especially the community members, whose stories had guided every brushstroke. She gestured to the Phoenix mural standing beside the new panels and said, "This alley was once a blank slate. Now it is our shared canvas, reminding us that history lives in our streets and our walls when we choose to paint it there." The applause that followed echoed like thunder, and neighborhood children leapt to ring a small brass bell placed at her side, its chime marking the mural's official debut. As dusk settled, guests drifted through the alley, reading the placards and pausing to share memories aloud. A grandmother pointing out her own childhood garden in one panel, a student recognizing his barbershop among the scenes, an activist thanking the museum for finally honoring grassroots work. In small clusters, people took selfies in front of their favorite murals, their reflections merging with the painted images. Amari circulated, accepting congratulations and witnessing how her vision had become a living forum for intergenerational dialogue. By night's end, the museum staff had collected hundreds of comment cards and digital messages, pledging continued support for public art initiatives. The director announced that Stories on Stone would expand next spring to include panel discussions, live painting events, and a traveling exhibition of community-curated murals at satellite galleries across the city. Amari's sketchbook lay open on a folding table, blank pages already filled with new ideas sparked by the evening's energy. As she finally stepped away from the illuminated alley, Amari paused to take in the mural cycle in its entirety, the phoenix rising into panels of past, present, and future. She felt a surge of quiet pride, knowing that what began as a solitary act of reclamation had become a robust celebration of identity and unity. In the glow of street lamp and spotlight, the alley had been transformed into a testament to what happens when art is wielded not just to decorate walls, but to empower every voice they enclose. Years later, the alley behind the museum felt more like a living street than a back entrance, its walls humming with color, its sidewalks lined with benches where visitors paused to study each panel. Amari Davis returned one morning, not to install a new piece, but to witness the ongoing ripple of her original act of defiance. She carried no brushes or binders, only a notebook filled with sketches of future projects inspired by what she saw. A group of school children arrived first, led by their art teacher. They clustered around the phoenix mural, tracing its golden feathers and pointing to the flowering garden scene that had sprouted from panel 2. One child lifted her hand, imitating the phoenix's wing, and pronounced, "I want to paint like her when I grow up." Amari smiled, watching the next generation claim space she had once been denied. Midday brought a steady stream of tourists, camera drones weaving overhead, smartphone maps pinning Alley Arts District, and museum brochures directing art lovers to this outdoor gallery. Nearby, a cafe whose windows faced the alley had added art tour combos to its menu. Espresso and croissant packages sold in branded, reusable mural tote bags, each illustrated with miniature reproductions of the panels. That afternoon, Amari stepped aside as a documentary crew filmed interviews for a special on art that changed a city. Historians, curators, fellow artists, and even the former exhibitions coordinator spoke candidly about how one unauthorized mural had forced the institution and the entire community to redefine the boundaries of public art. A curator confessed that the museum's initial rejection now stood as a case study in art schools, a lesson in the perils of serving only the familiar. As dusk fell, the alley lights flickered on, and a small crowd gathered for the monthly Stories Live series, an evening of poetry, music, and dialogue beneath the walls Amari had first claimed. She watched from the shadows as a spoken word artist recited verses about her grandmother's migration story beside panel 3, and as a jazz trio improvised beneath the kente-patterned border on panel 5. The crowd's applause rose like wind in the phoenix's feathers, carrying each note into the painted sky. On her way home, Amari paused at the final panel, the one depicting future youth looking skyward, arms outstretched toward the phoenix. She reached out and touched the weathered brushstroke, now softened by a decade of seasons. In that gesture, she felt the continuity of all who had contributed. Artists, community members, donors, skeptics turned believers. Her solitary act of midnight painting had become a communal canvas that would outlast any single generation. And as the alley behind the museum settled into nighttime calm, its murals glowing softly under the street lamps, Amari knew that her vision had taken flight. The walls she once approached with hope and defiance now stood as an enduring testament that when art claims the space of the unseen, it rewrites the story of a city, panel by vibrant panel.